Aloha and welcome to the Nako Exchange podcast. This is the Chiefs 9 Leadership Spectrum episode part 2. Again, we had such a great conversation during this episode, we decided to split it into two. If you are new here to the podcast and you didn't listen to last week's episode, it's already released. It released on July 15th. So go ahead and finish this episode and then go back and listen to the first part. Thank you very much and have a good day.
Hey, welcome everybody to the Chiefs 9 podcast. Today we're going to be talking about leadership spectrum, and I'm super excited. So grab your coffee, your water, sit back, relax, and enjoy. But I'd first like to introduce our two guests. We have Sergeant Alcala and Senior Master Sergeant Barrientes. And so I'll let them introduce themselves here.
Hi, I am Staff Sergeant Angelica Alcala. I'm with the 298th RTI Multifunctional Training Regiment.
Hello, everybody. I'm Senior Master Sergeant Barrientes. I'm over at the 154th Comptroller flight. I'm the Superintendent there.
Aloha. I'm Jeff Hickman. I'm the Public Affairs Officer, and you are?
I'm Chief Fox, if you don't already know.
Those relationships.
For sure.
You mentioned the infantry, the relationship with the infantryman and the HRO person, and you're talking about the person who comes in and says, I'm not here to make friends. Mm-hmm. That makes me think about the battle buddy concept for infantrymen and even the pilot and mechanic relationship, mm-hmm. because the pilot is going in the plane, trusts the mechanics that nothing is going to go wrong. Yeah. The battle buddy is in the foxhole with his battle buddy, and they know they can lean on each other. My life is in your hands, mm-hmm. yours is in mine. And that relationship is solid. Pilot to mechanics and crew. And so let's go to maybe an HR section or instructors. You still want to have you want to be able to lean on the person next to you. So I think sometimes, I'm not here to make friends, I'm just going to do it. Very small doses, I can see that. But man, I'm all about teamwork and building the relationships. Mm-hmm. And you said small world, you're going to run into these people. You mentioned the conversations and constructive criticism. And that was like the next topic that we wanted to ask you guys about, was having difficult conversations. That's part of a leader's responsibility. So what are some examples or your experience with maybe having a difficult conversation with someone under you or even a peer about leadership?
Right. So
even above you.
Even above you, yes.
Even above you.
So okay, so that's a great question, and having a difficult conversation. I can tell you though, it's something that you have to work on, right? It may come more natural for an individual to be able to communicate and articulate their thoughts, but then being able to have a constructive, hard topic discussion, it doesn't come easy. So it definitely takes practice and something that, like as in leaders, as you continue to progress and you're building your future leaders, you got to put them in those moments, put them in those situations so they can gain that experience. But it wasn't easy initially, I'll be honest. And me, naturally, my personality trait is pretty calm demeanor. I don't get easily rattled. However, that's changed a little bit. But initially, I usually stay level-headed, and that actually can be perceived, right? Being kind, soft, not assertive. Well, you can still be kind, soft-spoken, maybe, an introvert, but you can still be very effective when having a difficult conversation. It's just being able to have those conversations. You got to be comfortable with the uncomfortable conversations, sure. Right? So to answer your question, with airmen, they really, for me, at least I feel like they really want to grow and they want leadership. They're striving for it. You got to be able to be available and be able to provide that and be in the moment. And then when I talk about going up, I've had several conversations with individuals, and I think I've been able to have that because it's easy to have the conversation when you know. So be prepared, right? Be prepared. And then when you're in the moment, it can kind of feel a little stressful, but I've done it enough times now. If I need hey, Command Chief, I don't really agree with what you're saying, right? I think that I understand where you're coming from, but I don't agree with that approach. I think we need to take this approach, and this is why, right? So anytime you enter a conversation, one of the sayings that I like to take in all the time is clarity over agreement. I need to first make sure we understand where we're both coming from, right? Especially when you have those tough discussions, we need to both understand where we're coming from. So when you say something, I may say, hey, let me make sure I'm taking that in correctly, right? I want to make sure we're clear. So then once you find that like that clarity, then you can have those conversations where you can really get to maybe creating change, providing that constructive feedback. But that's most important for me is clarity over agreement, right? We may agree to disagree, and I'm sure we have had a lot of moments in those. But yeah, I think that's the foundation for me. Having constructive feedback.
It's not easy.
No.
And it gets better. But yeah, I think the key point you said is to be prepared. And a lot of experience can come with that. How about you? Difficult conversations.
There are books called How to Deal with Difficulty.
Yep.
And to be honest, my mom gave me that book like many years ago because she knows that, I'm going to be an adult one day, that I'm going to be dealing with difficult people. And I've come across the book a few times, but there's nothing, yes, you learn something in black and white on what you read, but it's not the same when you're actually doing the face-to-face. And so how I deal with difficult situation is I have to pray. I have to pray on it because sometimes your emotions and your feelings and what you really want to say doesn't come to a consensus. And because we work in an organization where we see each other all the time, Monday through Friday, you don't want to create that negative vibe all the time or even just a bit. And so what I do for me myself is I like to pray, please give me guidance, give me the wisdom.
That sounds like your preparation. That you prepared.
Yeah, that is my preparation because sometimes I don't know what to say sometimes, especially to someone who's an officer, who's a leader, more leader than I am, and has more experience in that realm of work. Or just things in general. I always ask for guidance because I can't do things on my own, and usually it's provided to me, like, seniors, everybody else it's provided to me in order to deal with difficult situations. And when I do deal with that, I give it at the softest moment where I get into that medium level where they are, because sometimes when I go back to the temple, because it could be just a situation. And going back to what you said is, you don't know people's background. You don't really know the shoes they're wearing or what they've been through because you just don't know. And you got to find that medium, and even in those difficult situations. And yes, and then once you break that clarity, that barrier, then you can kind of be more open and give those constructive criticism. And I have friends who I've been friends with for many years. Until this day, they have difficulty with constructive criticism. But because we're friends and we have that trust, that it's almost, I'll give them the warning, like, hey, let me just be honest with you. This is what you're doing. I need you to be more like this, or I need you to be this because you're dealing with this situation.
It sounds like that was your
warning.
Who had that difficult conversation with you.
you.
It's a step it up. They're watching. I like what you said is to keep the emotions out of it.
Oh, yeah.
And that's hard to do. And you talked about how it got easier, but emotions and being a leader, and if you're praying to prepare to yourself, it's really hard to keep that down and just get out the information. But I think if you don't, you're really doing a disservice to those beneath you.
No,
Chief.
I agree with that. I think that if I could, one thing that I liked, the thing that I took away from there, and something that we stress during our NCO professional development course that we teach is whenever you're in a difficult conversation, make sure number one priority is maintain the relationship. Okay, right? So that's the things that we advise. When you're in a conversation, I'm about to have a real conversation with this individual. You're not performing up to standards. Couple things, right? First, you want to maintain that relationship. Number one priority. And then when we talk about having those difficult conversations, if I need to give you real, hey, you're not meeting standards and expectations. Another saying that I like to live by is hard on the issue, soft on the people, right? Right. So that if we learn to take that approach more, you're gonna people are more willing to listen. So if I'm coming at you, an example is you're late to work again, and it's been 5 times in a row, right? Rather than come at you and be like, you just need to start showing up. I'm going to come in, I'm going to yell at you, whatever the case may be. Trust me, I'm going to be a little assertive, but at the same time, I want to get to the bottom of what's causing the issue, right? I'm here to help coach, mentor. Yes, we deal with adults, right? And we would expect them to get their life together, but sometimes they need a little bit of guidance in that way. So let's find out what the issue is. Let's see how we can try to prevent this, whether it's making sure that your alarms are set well before, making sure your phone is charged, right? Making sure you have all these variables that are in lines to help make sure that to get you here on time. But if we take the approach of, hard on the issue, soft on the people, I'm not going to yell at you, but let's get to the point. Let's get down to the issue and let's find out and fix that. So that was kind of one of the things I took away from what you were saying, making sure to maintain those relationships, build those relationships, because at the end of the day, we're going to have to work together tomorrow, right? And if you kill that relationship, how's that going to help your organization? How's that going to help that individual improve? Now you just deflated them. They're done.
Oh, yeah.
And that's not what we're here to do. We're here to curb behavior, but maintain those relationships. So
What just popped in my head is training a puppy. You can't scold the puppy, you scold the action.
Right.
And if they did something way before, you can't scold them for that. They're not going to remember. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so simple. Why don't we do that with humans?
Yeah.
We don't. We go after them instead of finding the reason why.
exactly.
Have you had any issues with difficult conversations or
Yeah.
feedback?
I think that's something you continue to try to get, I guess, comfortable with. They're never easy, to have those difficult conversations. But I like the process of seeking clarity, listening, and connecting and resonating on what the person is actually saying, so that you don't have your own agenda, I think, when you're trying to approach that person, because you might have something you got to speak to them about.
Right.
And I think that's very key, and to be very emotionally intelligent. Like, watch your body language. Don't approach it negatively. Try to be, come from a place of understanding, really, when it comes down to it. And then, like I said, a good listener. So I think, wow, this is a lot of great information and a lot of
I'm
good topics.
learning so
Me
much.
too.
The buzzwords you're saying and the examples.
And I never heard, I've only learned that like halfway through my 13 years. And I actually got it from that advice in an RSDP class that we had, rapid decision making process in a class for CERP. And it was actually a retired sergeant major. And because he knows the climate on where we are majority of the time, and we're again going back to that tempo, you always move your feelings and your emotions set aside, because that person could be a phenomenal soldier or airman, and just that moment, it's just a difficult time for them.
Right. So, Chief, you brought up a very good point, and right, emotional intelligence, and again, that's one of the core objectives that we kind of teach during that course. Is that's the foundation. I think whenever to have those difficult discussions, first you got to be able to, you got to look internal, right? You got to know your cues, your triggers and stuff like that, and that only comes from knowing yourself and that emotional intelligence. So. One of the things, and I have a partner on this. He's amazing. He's actually an PhD. He's got tenure over at Hawaiʻi. He's helped me with the course for a long time, and he tells this story about leadership. So there was a Fortune 500, right? He was getting all of the top. It was a Fortune 500 company. He was getting all the top individuals from MIT, right, Cornell, all the Ivy League schools. So these are top notch. Very smart individual. And once he got them in there, he was hiring them all. He saw when it came to development and leadership, he just saw a constant, like there was really nobody that was kind of stepping out of the peers. And he ended up going back, and he had a really good buddy that was into the field. And he's like, hey, what is it? Why aren't my people, we're giving them everything they need. There's something missing. And a study, this is where emotional intelligence actually started to come on the forefront. This has been actually still relatively new. It's like 40 or 50 years old. It's not still it's relatively new. And he realized that when his buddy was actually doing a study, he realized that was the one key element that was missing from creating and growing leaders, was the emotional intelligence piece. So they had their IQ, right? They had skills. They just lacked the emotional intelligence, lacked the ability to, first know themselves, what makes them click, but then more importantly, being able to see that in other people, right? So you brought up emotional intelligence, and that is such a huge thing for you to do, is you got to know thyself, right? You got to know yourself first. And so that's kind of one of the things that resonated with that when you said that, man.
And that's actually, we have an episode upcoming on emotional intelligence. Maybe we'll call you back on to speak about it.
There you go.
But I think, we want to close this out, and what we like to end our questions with for our guests are, what advice would you give to giving feedback and maybe even receiving feedback? I guess I can start with you.
Okay. Yeah. So I would say that advice, the only way to learn is to do. You got to put yourself in those situations. You got to be willing to. You may not hear something you want to hear, right, in those moments, but you got to learn to adapt and overcome. So I feel like listening more, knowing your verbal clauses, setting the right environment, making sure you remove barriers, making sure that they understand, your body language. Those are all very important. But then when you got to give a direct feedback, just be honest. Don't try to be direct, be honest. Don't try to, fluff it up or anything. If they're not doing something, just say, hey, this was the expectation. You're not meeting that, right? But at the same time, what can I do? How can I help you get there? What is it that maybe I need to clarify my message? Maybe it's something I need to look back at. So more importantly, be in the moment, listen, and be willing that if you're having those tough discussions, you got to be ready to be able to provide, here's how I can help, stuff like that. So I would say that the most important thing with those is listen, be in the moment.
Yeah, I agree with that. What about you, Sergeant?
I like what you said about honesty and not fluffing things up. I like constructive criticisms for myself, because I don't know, how am I going to grow if nobody tells me where I need to improve, or where I should sustain some of my personal, my side. But for sure, honesty is so important, because you don't want somebody to mislead them. You don't want to mislead them in their constructive criticism and their development. And however they might take it, sometimes at that moment it's not well taken, but at least you get the honesty of that message to them, and then let it kind of simmer a bit, and then eventually it'll take, it's kind of like your kids, like for my kids at least. One time is enough. I give them a few minutes and then let it kind of simmer, and then they get it. And then I learned that along the way, you just got to give them time to understand and what's really being given, constructive or not. It's just a simple conversation and always being honest.
Yeah,
sure.
right. Trust is hard
Yes.
to build, but it's so quick to lose.
Oh, for sure.
Right. So,
Yes.
yeah, you're spot on with that. What do you have, ma'am? What do you think?
No,
What advice would you give
I
for our
agree.
future leaders?
I think absolutely the listening. That is something that has taken me a very long time to realize, that we, as in our positions, we tend to want to be fixers or nurturers. We're already posturing to answer whatever it is that airman or soldier might have. And in reality, sometimes they just want you to listen, right? And asking them, do you want advice? Do you actually want me to do something? So I would say listening. What about you, Jeff?
I'm thinking of having expectations clear and in the open, and that goes along with
super
honesty and just making it clear. And it is hard as a senior leader, and with the experience, you get to a certain point where you can have the difficult conversation where you don't need fluff. Fluff is kind of holds some people up, but as you get more experience, then you don't need it. And you're just going to say, this is what I need from you. Here's the expectations. Does it meet? And then you go into everything else that you guys mentioned throughout the whole time is the one-on-ones, the effective communication back, the mentoring and the coaching. So great points made today. Really
Awesome.
Really good stuff.
Well, I'd like to thank you both for joining this episode of the Leadership Spectrum. And so, hopefully everybody out there learned something and got some great advice from these two extraordinary leaders for the Hawaii National Guard. So until the next episode, we're out here. Aloha.
Aloha. Oh, I wrote down so many notes.